Hi everyone and welcome to my channel. So like many people, I've been stuck at home, social distancing, and in that time I've found that I've had a lot more time to read. So in this video, I thought I'd go over some of the books that I've read during the months of March through May. So the first book I read was An Unkindness of Magicians by Kat Howard. And I really enjoyed this book. I think I rated it 4 stars on Goodreads. The story goes over a magic competition that happens in this like magical world once every few years. And in this magical world there are several houses and everyone belongs to a house. And this competition establishes which house will be in power for the next few years until the next competition. And so the characters that we're introduced to, they all belong in different houses. I thought that the magic system that the book established was really interesting in that the people who use magic, using that magic has like a toll on them, some type of physical toll, and that is incorporated into the house system and into the competition aspect in a very interesting way, because one of our competitors, one of the main characters, she wants to abolish the house system and wants the other wizards to kind of acknowledge the toll that magic has rather than trying to hide from it using the house system. And just other smaller plots kind of going into the intricacies of the powers and privileges that the different houses have. And so I thought that was really interesting. And I also liked the romance that they established between two of the main characters. And I thought that this book did a good job of setting up the romantic relationship between the two characters and establishing them as individuals and people outside of their romantic relationship, and really building up like why the romance makes sense, and not having them go from like 0, we just met, to 100, all right, we're getting married tomorrow.
100, all right, we're getting married tomorrow.
So the second book I read was All the Birds in the Sky by Charlie Jane Anders. So I like this book. So All the Birds in the Sky, it is about like the dual forces of technology versus magic, and our two main characters, one of them's like really good with technology and computers, and the other one is a witch, and they both meet when they're kids and they're having their own like troubled youths, bond over the fact that they're getting bullied, and so they become friends. And then the book kind of time skips into the future when they're all grown, and basically what's happening is that the apocalypse is coming, and we find our two characters on opposing forces, like magic versus technology. And I kind of wish that the book had gone more into the magical aspect of it, because I think the author did a good job of discussing the technology in the book and the technology that our main character is working with and why that's relevant, and just explain like the mechanics of it, versus the magic is kind of explained as like, well, it's magic and magic can do lots of things, and yeah, there are some limits, but it's magic. And I just wish there had been more explanation of what our main character's powers were, and kind of where she got them from, and how she's learned to use them more, and how that fits into the grand scheme of things. And then my next like big problem with the book is that the like apocalypse situation, I was kind of fuzzy about what that meant for almost the entirety of the book. And so because of that, the ending felt a little anticlimactic to me. And I think it could have just been better executed. Like conceptually, I enjoyed the idea of the ending. But I wish that we had had more details like describing like the relationship between technology and magic throughout the book, so the ending kind of made more sense. So the next book I read was Less by Andrew Sean Greer, and I think I rated this book 3 stars on Goodreads. And this book talks about Andrew Less, and he's a gay man who is turning 50 and kind of going through an existential crisis. He is an author, and he kind of feels like his life is like, what's it amounted to? And he finds out that his ex-boyfriend is getting married, and so he goes on like a year-round trip essentially. Each chapter is basically broken up into the countries that he visits. And while I liked the book, like I liked some aspects of the book, I enjoyed the traveling aspect and the learning new things in each country aspect. I didn't really like Less as a character. I felt like he really didn't learn that much throughout the book. I think he was very self-pitying for the majority of the book, and it honestly, to me, felt kind of annoying. And I wish that he had taken some of more of the lessons that he had learned from the other side characters, and come to a different conclusion about what his life should have been, because I think he was very focused on wanting to have a really grand award-winning life like some of the authors that he really admires, and coming to terms with maybe not everyone has that sort of life, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. And I don't know if I really liked the ending type of situation between him and his ex, and kind of how that relationship ended up. So yeah, this book was okay. It was a nice light read, but yeah, it was fine. It was a fine read. It was fine. So another mediocre read for me was The Clockmaker's Daughter by Kate Morton. I really wanted to like this book. I wanted to like it so much because it checks off a lot of boxes for me. It's a historical fiction. It has elements of romance in it. It is a multi-generational story. It goes over many different timelines, and it has some murder mystery aspects. So checks off all the boxes for me, but it was just so boring, I guess. I found the past timelines to be really interesting between the artist and the his love interest character. I found that timeline to be really interesting, but I didn't really find the present day timeline to be that interesting, because it was just the character trying to figure out what's going on, who was this girl who's seen in this artist's paintings, why is she relevant. I didn't think that was super interesting. I felt like the book could have just been told from the past historical timeline, and I also didn't like the romance that they threw in for our present day character at the very last minute of the book. It felt kind of unnecessary to me. The present timeline, totally unnecessary. The middle timeline was fine, but that's pretty much all I have to say about it. It was fine. It was a fine story. It was a nice filler, but there wasn't a lot of anything of extra value I gained from having that timeline in the story, I think. And I really just found the past timeline, the original one, to be the most interesting, talking about the female characters like childhood and how she grew up, to how she like met the artist, to her ultimate death. That was like the most engaging part of the story for me, and the rest of the story was fine. So the next book I read was Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng. And I originally started the Hulu miniseries for this, but I just couldn't wait for the episodes to come out on a week-by-week basis, so I just ended up getting the book. And I really like this book. I thought it was incredibly engaging. I really like Celeste Ng's writing style. I thought that she really captured like the way I think, but like put it into words. And I thought that she did a really good job of examining like the relationships between motherhood and race and class privilege, and kind of uncovering what it means to be a mother. And I thought the parallel situations that she set up throughout the book between what is going on with Bibi and her child, and what went on with Mia and, you know, her past situation, and what's going on with the Richardsons and Mia, like all of those different parallels I thought were very well crafted and showed a multitude of experiences of what it means to be a mother, and whether privilege and class can really take away from motherly love and really replicate a biological mother's affection. And I also really enjoyed the like kids storyline. So beyond what's going on with the mothers, Celeste Ng also went through what's going on with Mia's daughters and then all the Richardson kids. And once you hear about all those stories and how they all intersect, like what Lexi and Trip and Moody, what they all do, the ending scene like really made a lot of sense for me. And this is also why I like the ending scene of the book a lot more than the show. I thought that the book's ending was a nice culmination of everything that the like Richardson kids had been going through in relation to like Mia's daughter Pearl. I would recommend both the book and the show. I think they were both really well done. There are just like a few differences between the two, especially with the ending. And I think the book was more nuanced in the way it discussed those themes I mentioned earlier about like race and class and motherhood. So the next book I read was Unmarriageable by Sonia Kamal, which is a Pakistani retelling of Pride and Prejudice. I thought this book was super fun to read. It was really light and it was funny, and I liked all of the sisters that were meant to, you know, represent the Bennett sisters in the original Pride and Prejudice. The story is pretty much just follows the main family that represents the Bennett family, but in Pakistan. And the main character of the story, Alice, she is like 30, and you know, she's unmarried, and all of her other sisters are unmarried, and it just goes through all the relationships and romances that, you know, she and her sisters form, as well as her friend Sherry, who's supposed to represent Charlotte. So I thought that this book made a lot of sense because it is really relevant to make like a Pride and Prejudice retelling but set in Pakistan. I'm not Pakistani, but there's a lot of similarities between Pakistani culture and Indian culture, and there's such a huge emphasis on marriage and getting married, especially, you know, as you age as a woman. And Alice's mother's like intensity about like having to get her daughters married and having to get them married to like a higher class man is definitely something that I've heard echoed throughout Indian culture and Indian society. So I thought that Kamal's like retelling like and dispersing like elements of Pakistani culture like throughout the story was really great, and showing like the parallels between modern day Pakistan and England during Jane Austen's time. I would say some things that were all right for me was like the romance between Alice and Darcy. I felt like they probably could have connected a little bit more throughout the story before they eventually like, you know, marry and fall in love. Like, I think their relationship was fine. I just would have liked a little bit more development. I think that the relationship between the sisters was really well written. It was like a nice balance between comedic and heartwarming, and showing like the family like really does care for each other, especially the two older sisters, that they care for each other and for their younger sisters a lot. I think the book also did a good job highlighting the toxic effects that marriage culture can have for young Pakistani girls, in that like Alice is a school teacher, and so is her older sister, and they have both witnessed like girls in their class dropping out before to get married, even though, you know, they're only like 14 or 15. And I think Alice, being like a very feminist character, highlighted why it's important for, you know, girls to go to school and to continue to like fight against the patriarchy. And it came off like a little preachy at times, to be honest, but I think it was like important to include. Overall, I thought that this book was really fun, and it's a nice light read, especially if you're just looking for like a cute romantic book that'll both have romance and also talk about like familial relationships. I was not looking forward to this part of the video, but the last book I read in May was Six Suspects by Vikas Swarup, where I don't know if words can describe how much I dislike this book. So my main gripes with it is that I entered this book thinking that it was going to be a murder mystery, and that it would be about like solving the murder of this guy who was known in, you know, the Indian society presented in this book, of being like a gangster and being corrupt and getting away with a lot of things. So I thought it would be about figuring out his murder. There are six suspects that were presented to in the story. The first of which is he's like a retired politician, I think, who believes that he's been possessed by the spirit of Mohandas Gandhi. The second is a corrupt politician who is the father of Ricky. The third is a mobile phone thief who comes upon like a crazy amount of money. The fourth is a really famous Indian actress, or a fictional Indian actress. The fifth is an American who's in India. And the sixth is a tribal person from the Andaman Islands. The author goes into a lot of depth describing each of these six storylines, but they could have been told as like separate stories, because there was like almost no relation or no like intermingling between any of the storylines. Like usually, you know, when you have stories like that where you have like separate storylines, you expect them all to like come together at some point, or expect like, you know, two of them to intersect at some point throughout the story and have a lot of like tangling. But the storylines were pretty much all separate, and there was so much like information about all of the characters that on their own might have been enjoyable, but you know, you're reading and reading and reading and wondering like, well, what does this have to do with the murder that happened at the very beginning of the book? Secondly, I didn't like at all how the author wrote the women in this book. They're either like shy virgins, they're so shy and chaste and like have never spoken to a man, or they're mothers, or they're like, I don't know, like incredibly like sexualized. Like this book was like sexualized in a really weird way. Like a lot of the male characters were just like obsessed with, I don't know, sexualizing like just random women like who don't have any role in the story but are just there to be sexualized. And I didn't care for that personally. And I found, you know, some of the storylines, like I said, to be entertaining on their own. Like I thought that the actress's storyline was like really interesting, and I kind of wish they had gotten more into her like family background, like as a separate story. Like this could have been a separate book. And I liked like the tribes members storyline as well. I think there's not a lot of like content out there about the Andaman Islands, so I thought that was really interesting, just like an interesting perspective to get. And like I said, you could have written a whole separate book about his storyline, but the Americans storyline was totally nonsensical, and I feel like I really couldn't tell if the author was meaning for this book to come off as a satire or if he meant for it to be a serious read. Like when they're talking about like the corruption by the police, and like the corrupt politicians and like police brutality in India, and talking about like caste privileges and wealth privileges, like that was all like very real and relevant. And I honestly thought that when I went into this book that I would get a lot more like meat about the like hypocrisies that exist in Indian society today. I was disappointed in that aspect. And then lastly, like the ending was really disappointing as well, because I don't read like that many mystery type books. So I'm not sure how familiar this like tactic is, but I feel like if you're gonna make me read a whole book about 6 characters, you would think that in the end at least one of them would be relevant to the murder and that we've been trying to solve this whole book. But in the end, I really don't think any of them were. I felt like I was conned out of a good ending, out of a satisfying ending. So those are all the books that I read in the months of March through May. I know it's a really long video, but I read more books than I thought I did. And I'm hoping that while we're all still kind of social distancing for the next few weeks or few months, that I'll have a lot more opportunities to read more books and really fall back into reading. So, you know, stay tuned for more book updates from me. I'm also going to include some links in the description below for an anti-racism reading list, as well as some links to support Black artists and donate to bail funds and petitions you can sign. So thanks so much for watching. Please check out the links below, and I'll see you all next time.